Welcome to For Talks. With me is David Mahon. He is an investor, a market analyst, and indeed a geopolitical analyst based in Beijing. He's a Kiwi, originally from New Zealand. He's a man who's traveled a lot, loves to explore cultures, has a deep appreciation of India, and is very well placed to comment on the topic of our discussion today. The changing balance of power in Northeast Asia. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Atul.
David, without further ado, for our viewers and listeners, define Northeast Asia.
It's a good question because Asia itself is a rather amorphous term. Often think there's no such place as Asia. Such different cultures, huge geographical coverage. Northeast Asia really is China's the main pivot point that you look towards Korea, Japan, and then you look down to the Philippines. That area is significant because it also relates to the Western Pacific. And there's a point since the Korean War, since 1950s, where China's basically been at least blockaded, the potential of blockade from particularly Japan, the Philippines, Taiwan, and its access to its northeast has always been potentially inhibited. And one of its main aims is to break that implied or that potentially imminent blockade of its movement of its goods and, of course, of its navy. So it's a very important region, and all the countries mentioned and the island of Taiwan are going through huge changes at the moment.
You didn't mention Russia, which gobbled a lot of Chinese territory in the 19th century and which sprawls all the way close to Alaska. Indeed, Russia once had Alaska and sold it in a rather cheap deal to the US. I believe it was 1867. I could be wrong. But the point is, where does Russia come in? And just very quickly, Russia has taken Japanese islands at the end of World War II, and technically there is still no peace between Japan and Russia. Over to you.
Good you mentioned Russia. So perhaps I can go to reference Xi Jinping's recent visit to North Korea, which was unusual. And there's a lot of speculation as to why he went and what happened when he went there. And he went there for the very reason you've identified. Russia has become increasingly important in its far eastern fringes. For a long time, the economic concentrations in Siberia and coastal Russia on its eastern edges and into the Pacific was not significant because very low population base, not much industry. It's become more and more important. Part of that is because China has a closer relationship with Russia, and China buys a great deal of oil and other natural resources
and
from
gas.
Russia.
Oil and gas in particular, yeah.
But also there is the issue of North Korea. And despite its long isolation, really for decades, North Korea has come into a geopolitical position that matters to both China and Russia quite a lot, and is one of the main forces in the thinking of anyone else in the region. So if you are in Seoul making policy, considering military investment, if you're in Japan and thinking of your own security, and for that matter, if you're the United States looking at its own military presence and influence in the area, Russia is important because it's now much closer to North Korea than it's been for a very, very long time. And the North Korean economy is benefiting from the fact that it's supplying not just soldiers, and they were token to begin with, but it seems some tens of thousands are now being sent into the conflict on the side of Russia in Ukraine. But the extent to which Russia has looked to North Korea for ammunition, for missiles, I think today a missile hit Kiev, and it was identified as being a North Korean missile. So China for a long time kept North Korea on a infusion of economic life support. It was no more than that. It didn't want it to collapse. China has not approved of how North Korea has evolved. And for a long time, it kept declaring that it wanted a nuclear-free Korean peninsula. But Xi visited recently, and in his conversations, he did not mention the nuclear-free Korean peninsula. He did make one reference to the fact that what North Korea did in reference to its own development in nuclear armaments was its own business. So Korea has developed some agency here. Russia wants weapons from it. It needs ammunition for its artillery. It has also this increasing volume of troops, although I hear many are going into the industrial system of Russia, which is hugely understaffed because of the war. So Russia has this relationship. China has a relationship with Russia. It's a good one. And there are economic benefits to both sides. So on the one hand, it's a friend of Russia's. On the other, it doesn't want too much Russian influence in North Korea, which sits on China's borders. So I think there is a very clever, and I would say one thing, Korean politicians and leaders are very capable politically. They've survived against impossible economic odds. They've survived against embargoes and almost the complete isolation of the country.
You mean
they're
North
playing
Korea?
Russia. North Korea, yes.
Yeah.
So North Korea is playing Russia to some extent for more, and then asking China for more. So after he returned to Beijing, the North Korean Prime Minister came to Beijing, and a deal was signed for massive aid in terms of food, fuel oil, cooking oil, bags of grain. So this has been a big economic benefit to North Korea, which has been struggling hugely in recent decades to feed itself from its meager arable land and its sizable population. So there's this, it's not a most important factor, but both countries are now more involved in North Korea. The good thing is they are more likely to also bring some constraint to Korea's actions, because Korea is now, for the first time in a very long time, engaged beyond its borders, and it needs to maintain these relationships. So we'll be curious to see how this all plays out, but it is a new dynamic in the region.
David, I would be remiss if I didn't go into the meaning of the term changing balance of power. Changing means there is a change underway, obviously. And you alluded to internal changes in all these different countries. You've explained the changes in North Korea. But very quickly, let's look at Northeast Asia since World War II. Well, after World War II, there is the Korean War. And to this day, the Korean Peninsula is divided into North and South Korea. On the one side are, of course, the communists. On the other side are the others, freedom-loving, liberty-seeking, patriotic Koreans. Anyway, long story short, the Americans jump in to help South Korea. The Chinese end up helping North Korea. They end up fighting each other to a standstill. And the Korean Peninsula is divided. In Japan, the Americans set up shop. They change Japan. They convert Japan into a democracy. It's a one-party democracy. Nevertheless, it is a democracy. They do not undertake the same level of denazification as in Germany. Of course, a few people are tried and then summarily hung. But on the whole, the Japanese society, yes, it changes, but it does not see the same degree of purge. Yet Japan completely comes under the thumb of America. During the Cold War, you have Japan and South Korea on one side. You have the Soviet Union and China on the other. China wins its or independence from Japan, and then the communist triumph in the Civil War, and of course the Kuomintang flees to Taiwan. So you have two camps, and then there's a breach between China and the Soviet Union, and there's a rapprochement between the US. I'm jumping over many decades. Of course, there's a rapprochement between the US and China. Then, of course, what transpires is the fall of the Soviet Union. China becomes the workshop of the world, starting from Deng Xiaoping's reforms in 1978 to Nangshun, when Deng Xiaoping bets on economic reform, doubles down on economic reforms in 1992, to China's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001. China really erupts on the global stage. And bit by bit, China becomes the 800-pound gorilla everyone worries about. There is tension in East China Sea, there's tension in South China Sea, which is not a topic of our discussion today. And now you have Japanese fears of Chinese aggression and expansion. You have Japan, Philippines collaborating together. You have talk of Japan and South Korea collaborating together. And yet, interestingly, since you've pointed to North Korea has dropped the goal of reunification. So a lot has changed in 2026 as we sit today. It's morning here, early morning on Tuesday, the 11th of August, and it is evening for you in Beijing, Tuesday, 11th of August. What exactly is changing in August 2026, or let's say as we speak in these weeks and months, from what I described above? And please correct me if I got anything incorrect.
Well, I think the main thing is, yes, the idea that Japan is under threat, the Philippines are under threat from Chinese aggression. What is actually happening is China is watching America retreat from Northeast Asia. It's been going on for some time, but it has been, in a signature sense, epitomized by America removing the THAAD missile systems from South Korea and also the Patriot missile arsenals from Japan. Most have gone and most have been spent in the war in the Persian Gulf. It takes years to build these munitions back again, and America needs them for its own arsenal. So South Korea and Japan begin to feel vulnerable. But China has no desire and no purpose to expand into South Korea, to threaten Japan militarily. China wants to do deals with all the countries in the region, including the Philippines. But America has been using the Philippines, South Korea, and Japan as a way of containing China since the Korean War. And even during the Great...
May I just quickly interrupt? China has claims to islands which Japan disputes. There are territorial disputes between these two countries. I'd be remiss not to point that out.
Sure. But, the Daita Islands or the Shinkiku Islands, they're small outcrops of rocks. They're more symbolic than they are strategic. And China has occupied some islands, as we said, in the South China Sea. What it's wanting to see is the withdrawal of the American military presence on the fringes of its own territorial waters. That's its main aim. And it's not doing anything aggressive to achieve that. It's watching America engage in wars that are expensive. I mean, if you could argue that America was instrumental in the victory in the Second World War, but has lost every war since. One of them was the Korean War. America went all the way to Pyongyang, right to the Chinese border. The Chinese then entered the fray. They felt their borders were threatened. And essentially, America retreated back to the 38th parallel. So then you had the failure in Vietnam. So for America, America's big and powerful enough; it can afford to lose these wars and maintain power and prestige over the decades when those happened. But now it's in a situation where it is struggling to afford to keep in place the level of military presence and hardware that it has for so many years managed to sustain. So with these going out of the system, China is seeing that those countries that for a long time were part of a bloc against it are being pushed forward by China in a way, although physically that's impossible, but in a geopolitical sense, in the path of the US military withdrawal from Northeast Asia, it is pushing these countries towards China in terms of saying they must now carry the responsibilities to contain China, something none of these nations have any chance of doing. So we're going through a period of a frenzy of Japan increasing its defense spending, considering ending its law of neutrality, and even going into developing nuclear weapons for its defense. We're seeing the Philippines in a relationship with the US, which is very close at this stage. The Philippines have been given a guarantee by America that a Filipino territory is the same as American territory and sovereignty, so they will defend them. But the Philippines know that America's abilities to do that is waning. So in a dynamic, you have a weakening of the military presence in this region that no one anticipated. No one thought that America would attack Iran in the way it did and spend as much ordnance as it has spent. So even if you look at the Pacific fleets, one of the main carrier fleets was moved to the Persian Gulf, which essentially hugely weakened America's presence because, of course, carrier fleets have destroyers and submarines and lots of aircraft, and it's a whole military system around one aircraft carrier. So rather than having to fight America, which is what a lot of people forecast would be inevitable, that is becoming less and less likely. Time is on China's side. China's response to this is doing nothing. Now, you wouldn't think so if you look at Japan's rather frenzied attempts to form an alliance with Taiwan, with the Philippines, talking to Vietnam. All this will pass. This is the product of a very narrow nationalistic leadership. Takaichi is the Liz Truss of Asia. She's about to tank the Japanese economy to some degree with similar stupidity in terms of not understanding economics. So what we're seeing is, at the same time as the focus has been on...
David, those are harsh words for Sanae Takaichi, the first woman prime minister of a deeply conservative country.
They are realistic assessments of the most recent policies she's announced. Japan is in very difficult economic straits. But there's a way out of this. And that is because America is no longer able to guarantee the kind of alliances that it has formed. These are pragmatic countries. These are old civilizations, all of them. And they will be realistic. And they'll do deals. They will do deals with Beijing. They will come to agreements on limits in terms of military buildup, because in the end, everyone wants economic prosperity.
So, David, I hate to be a party pooper, but may I point that the 19th century was horrendous for China. And in the 20th century, these very old civilizations didn't make wise choices. Japan followed a policy of expansion and aggression. And my point is not that China will do the same, but my point is that they may be practical, but there is ample scope for miscalculation, and human beings are human beings. And often they make, shall we say, unwise decisions.
That's very true. And I think if we look at the current geopolitics of the entire Pacific, Asia, Indian Ocean, there's a big change. And the change is the one that has been much analyzed. And that is, whether you take it as the last 300 or 500 years, white Europeans have been dominating the world, and they no longer are able to do that. So the decline of the West has meant a massive shift from roughly 8% of the global population running everybody else to the major concentrations of population, Asia, getting an increasingly political agency. So to see a shift like this means the dynamics are different than the 19th century, early 20th century.
Sure, but if I may very quickly interject, East Asia is seeing a demographic decline even greater than the West, all the way from Singapore to Hong Kong, China, South Korea, North Korea, Japan. Asian women or East Asian women and Northeast Asian women are not having children.
Demographic declines, you can take two theories. One is a decline of civilization, a decline in race, which means that you don't procreate, there's a lack of confidence in forming families, making companies. The demographic declines in Asia, most of it related to economic circumstances. If those economic circumstances can change, then I think, and there's never a demographic equilibrium, but these trends of decline will also change. China is going through, as we all know, a major demographic shift and a decline in population. Yes. But these factors are part of the adjustment of this region coming to the center of the global economy. And I don't believe that a nation like Japan wants to actually have a lot more people. They want more younger people. But as the older generation pass away and there is a smaller population, it becomes a more manageable country. That's certainly the case here. It's going to be rough, probably for my lifetime. But in the scale of history, one lifetime or a handful of generations is not in the end the arbiter of what happens to that nation. In these senses, it's a kind of settling down to the point where, because of economic circumstances, people won't have to have as many children for the insurance policy. There's large families in poorer aspects of society constituted. They will choose, as the West for a long time chose to have a couple of kids, not 5 children, or as my grandmother had 8 children. So these things it is the data points of transition. And to look at them as being major trends, the economic circumstances of these countries and their importance to global economics is what is going to be the templates for the future. There'll be many problems. And, you know, America's just signed this agreement which includes defense aspects with Indonesia. But the same week, the president of Indonesia flew to Moscow and had meetings with Putin, making a statement. We should take from this what we want. This is no longer the act of dependence it may have been in previous decades. And China will get things wrong. It is getting things wrong as we speak in terms of its economic policy. It's still struggling with a lot of social policies. But essentially, China is in the process of basically being the basis of the great technological industrial revolution, in the same way that Europe and later the US was in the industrial revolution, the mechanical industrial revolution. So it is doing everything to attend to making the smoothest transition possible. So there is no way it can consider making any aggressive moves militarily towards anybody. And even if you looked at someone that wanted to, the Chinese People Liberation Army has just gone through huge upheavals in changes in leadership, essentially around corruption. And one of the Western myths is it was power plays against Xi Jinping, which is the wishful thinking of the West. It wasn't. The opaqueness of the People's Liberation Army and its scale means that there's a lot of corruption. It's not in a state to mount anything aggressive in terms of going into other people's territories. So it's similar to do with...
And yet the PLA has been following what many call salami slicing, and some have started calling pizza slicing, whether it is in South China Sea or whether it is even on the border with India. So the PLA may not be in a state for a war, given the purges of top generals given the organizational upheaval. And yet, some say a leopard cannot change its spots, and fundamentally, the PLA is an expansionist army.
No, it's not. The PLA is a organ of the state, totally under control of the party.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone that can provide evidence to the contrary, dig into, I mean, I don't know where they would find it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there are a lot. These are, in the big scheme of things, these points of friction, these points where there is stress, these are not leading us into major war, because those they're dealing with, and India is an example, they're too sensible to be drawn into something that gets out of control. So these are contained by all parties involved, basically wanting to do the best for their own countries and look to their own economies. So I think China is not doing that. I think that is a paranoid view, not your own, of course, but of many Western commentators. The West still cannot stomach that for most of the history of my culture, people that don't look like me were considered inferior. And so in some way or another could never develop the educational levels, the innovation in industry, could never organize and run their own countries within their own systems. We thought, or my ancestors, forebears thought, they had the answer to everything. And that we're having to realize, or Western governments are having to realize, my own included, Australia as well, that Asia is more successful and on a much better trajectory for future success than they are in their own economies. So this is very difficult for Westerners to accept. So they will come up with a lot of reasons why there's even more wrong with people that don't look like us.
Well, be that as may be, what you've described is that there has been a massive industrial revolution in China. China is the workshop of the world when it comes to solar power, when it comes to battery technologies, when it comes to AI, when it comes to anything we use, whether it is this cell phone in my hand or the glasses, the reading glasses I wear. A lot of these things come from China. And South Korea is also an economic miracle. It is highly productive. Busan's shipyards are probably the finest in the world. Taiwan is the semiconductor country on the planet. Japan still has advanced technologies, and all these places still make things. And they are remarkably more powerful economically and indeed geopolitically and even militarily than they were 100 years ago, when maybe not Japan, but all the others. And that shift of power is going from the west to the east. Fine. But we are also living at a time when tensions, as you've also pointed out, I'm summarizing what you've said, because of American decline and withdrawal, because America is stuck in the Middle East. Barack Obama's Asia pivot didn't succeed. Yes, the US Treasury is backing the yen, and you can say Donald Trump has executed the Asia pivot, and Scott Bessent have executed the Asia pivot together when it comes to economics, but abandoned their allies in Northeast Asia militarily, and they are running scared. And so what happens now, given the lay of the land? Are these tensions going to persist? Do we see more military buildup? Do we see more economic challenges? Because we are speaking at a time when, yes, on the bright side, North Korea says reunification is no longer a goal. On the not so bright side, the South Korean stock index has fallen. The yen is crashing. Taiwan, the Taiwanese markets have also suffered a dip. The Chinese economy is also under some strain. The Russians, yes, they've managed the war very well, but the Russians in their northeast also have demographic challenges. There are fears that Vladivostok could end up in Chinese hands one day, What happens next, sir?
Back in Chinese hands. It was a Chinese city.
Yes, indeed, back in Chinese hands.
Yes.
I stand corrected. I mentioned that Russia gobbled a lot of Chinese territory in the 19th century.
You did. Yes.
A hell of a lot, actually.
I mean, I think the thing to look at, I look at in terms of China, is that China's biggest problem is itself. So
you could say the same thing about America.
That's true, but when people look at China and consider what they think it's trying to achieve globally in replacing the US and achieving primacy in major areas of the world, China is trying to do what it can to maintain a stable society and a stable economic environment. So everything it does is for its domestic economy. That's so vital for them, because still we have 600 million people that earn less than $1,000 a month. We have concentrations in the southeast of growth and wealth, and more in other parts of China we have essentially recession. So this patchwork is something that this government and the private sector of China are doing all that they can to stabilize the best they can. So it's not that they want to saturate the world with BYD vehicles. They want to generate earnings for an excess of electric vehicles in a sector which at home it's very hard to get the same prices. Everything relates to feeding back to the Chinese economy. So what they want most is a stable Asia they can trade with. They are already the dominant economic force. US primacy economically, and one would argue European influence in Asia, has waned hugely. So China's won the economic war already.
The Europeans don't really matter in Asia anymore.
Not anymore. Yeah. Unless you're France and you've kept your colonies together in the South Pacific. But yes, that's true. So I think for the Chinese, that's their main focus. All they would want is to deal with all those countries we've mentioned as prosperous trading partners. And they have a problem, because one of their instruments in creating wealth in other countries and creating circumstances that they can trade with them more easily is the Belt and Road Initiative. I think we have passed peak Belt and Road already, because now they're going to keep more money in the country. And that's not a bad thing. Part of it was very helpful to Africa. It's been useful in some of the Eastern European countries. But Belt and Road had run into some...
definitely.
Yes, definitely. So China had run into some major political impediments for the continuation of Belt and Road as it would have liked. So I think quietly the government's quite relieved they can back off on this, because it's tough. I mean, you go into Malaysia and you want to do a deal. Malaysia's worried what America will think. They don't want a Belt and Road contract. So these things have basically changed the way China is positioning, or has positioned itself internationally. I think we have to look back to, yes, this is a powerful economy. It does grow 5%, perhaps 4% this year, but it is fraught with many, many problems. So China will need to go on dealing with those and managing that huge industrial transition it's going through. It's not in a position to do anything other than do its best to have good trading and economic relations with its neighbors and further afield. Not because it's nicer than other countries. It is in its interest to do so.
I see. So we expect friction, but we expect reason to prevail because of interests, not necessarily because of values. Would that be fair?
I think that's true. I think values are difficult things to define. I think a strong nation that's confident and wealthy can afford to have a bunch of ethics and expect others to follow them. But they're normally the product of a level of dominance or primacy. We've got to be careful ascribing collective virtues to nations, because they are immensely dynamic and conflicted, because they're made up of human beings.
Excellent. David, final thoughts on the changing balance of power. What do we expect demographically, economically? You've already given us many clues. Economically, East Asia will remain dominant. Demographically, you think these trends could be reversed. Militarily, geopolitically, some crystal ball gazing, and then we ring down the curtain.
I see a situation where China increases its relationship with Russia and deepens it, because it is a reckless partner. China did not want Russia to invade Ukraine and was furious when it did. China has another problem, which is that Russia's influence, its ability to support many of the governments in Central Asia, is basically gone because the Central Asian societies have seen that Russia's a bit of a paper tiger militarily. So China's now involved in that region deeply economically, and it's facing now needs to do what Russia was doing for it, which was sort of kept the security piece. China will have to do that for itself. That'll be difficult because Central Asia is the variation from country to country in political systems and levels of freedom, the nature of their economies is such that's a very complex challenge for them. Mm-hmm. So these are big things for China to have to deal with. I think going forward, one of the things that we also have to be aware of is that the United States is lashing out in its decline. This is what the Iran war is. It's an attempt, we are told, was bluffed by Netanyahu into making war with Iran to win quickly.
That is indeed the word on the street in Washington, D.C. I can confirm that.
And he's so dumb because every president before him was asked by Israeli prime ministers to do the same thing, and they said, forget about it. And he was too dumb to realize this won't work. So we're seeing many things happening in the US.
Or he's courageous and bold and imaginative and a very stable genius. So he thought, let's slay the dragon once and for all.
Well, I'm sure that the CIA are listening to this podcast in your house in Washington, so you have to say such things. But so my concern is, what does America do to try and redefine its power as things wane? But for China, I don't think it matters because China, oddly, is isolated in the same way America's isolated. Huge deserts to the west, the great emptiness of Russia to its north, and a very manageable cluster of countries to its south and its southwest. China's not an easy country to invade. China is a country where, in bad ways, it is isolated. So sometimes it has its own internal thinking. It doesn't think globally in a way that it probably should, given how powerful it is. But it means that isolation gives it a sense of security. So there'll be no need for it to do things militarily for its own territorial security. My real concern
sorry, interrupting you very briefly. But China's sense of insecurity is sometimes palpable when you look at the evoking of 19th century history, the century of humiliation. China is also insecure about being blocked, its sea lanes being blocked, Strait of Malacca and Strait of Hormuz too. Go back to the speech Hu Jintao gave ages ago about the Malacca dilemma, and there is insecurity certainly in Japan today, and there is insecurity in Taiwan and South Korea. So there are insecurities in Northeast Asia.
Yeah. I think insecurity goes with the emergence of power. As a country, as an emerging power, it has two things: a gathering self-esteem, a sense of potential primacy in areas in the past that it didn't have. And this is evident as a contradiction in China. But I'm sure if we track the rise of the British Empire, it was a flux between those two modes of thinking. And the United States is a classic example. The point to which it became truly confident in its own economic power was very late in the day, because for a very long time, Britain largely dominated the world. So these things, someone making their way in life as an individual in their vocation, you have the courage to do it, you have the confidence of your education or your experience matched by the insecurity of your inexperience. So I think these are normal things, not weird factors specific to a culture that will disrupt it. So we're going to have some rough times. I'm very concerned about the Middle East. I'm very concerned of the decline of Europe and the fear in Europe. I'm concerned about the great disparity in the US and the great divisions and polarization in the US. This is not going to be an easy group of decades going forwards.
But and these will have ramifications and implications for Northeast Asia too. That's what you
yes,
you
they
fear.
Will, definitely. Yeah. I foresee it. I'm not that afraid. I think Asia is on the rise, and in the great movement of civilizations we're in the midst of one now, and it is Asia, including India. So, and we will look at what happens. But the rising cultures will make good choices. Countries that are gathering in power and gathering in ability make better and better choices. Countries and cultures in decline double down on making bad choices, a bit like someone who's an alcoholic or a drug addict or suffering from something that impairs their judgment. So it'll be a big, bumpy ride.
One could argue that India has no judgment, and India has not been making good choices. So I wouldn't lump India in that group. But carry on.
For me, I think India's the most contradicted, baffling country. And as you know, I've been 15 times. Last year's most years.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I look at what initially gave me faith in this country in the 80s. And it was the aspiration and tenacity of the people. And regardless of the political and structural problems of India, I go back to the people, educated, aspiring people. Something will sort out. It might be a painful process. And this is not the topic of this podcast. But so I think this is a rising region, and it's going to carry a lot in terms of how those countries that adjust to it in the West, hopefully Australasia, which currently are making poor choices strategically, will benefit greatly from it. So the future of most other economies in the world is how they relate to Asia, and in particular China.
All right. Very, very interesting, very bullish on Northeast Asia, and actually not that concerned about war, and especially nuclear war. So on that cheery note, at a time when the US Israel-Iran war is on, at a time when the Russia-Ukraine war is on, David Mahon, thank you very much for your time. We'll have you back. If you've enjoyed this discussion, make sure you like our YouTube channel, you press the bell icon, and you go to our website, you subscribe to our newsletter. And in case you are a professional and you use LinkedIn, we put out analysis and our judgment out on Fair Observer, as well as another page, FY. We look forward to engaging with you across all platforms. I'm the Editor-in-Chief. I'm Atul Singh, sitting here in Washington, D.C., signing off now. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Atul.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.